clock says 3, so I think we will go ahead and get started. Welcome to the fourth, oh wait a minute. It's supposed to be tonight. Try again. Welcome to the fourth installment of the Golden Age of the Oboe. Some of you have been, I think, for all of these, but for any who haven't, the Golden Age is the 18th century. 5 of the composers that I'm presenting in this series were born within 8 years of each other, just before the 18th century. All came of age. And so in the first 3 months we heard Vivaldi, Telemann, Handel, Bach, and Marcello. Now today we're going to move to the second half of the 18th century. I'll look at 2 composers today and maybe a third. And those 3 are Haydn, Cimarosa, who we maybe haven't heard of, and Mozart. So 2 of the 3 probably everybody's heard of. One of the comments I got last time was more oboe, less talk. So we'll go right into Haydn here quickly. Born in 1732. Among other things, he's known as a friend and a mentor to Mozart, another of the 3 in this second group. Some of you may know who his most famous student was. Larry Allen, you don't count. Anybody? Beethoven. Okay. He was born in Austria. He showed musical talent early on, so from the age of 6, he was put into musical training. By the time he was 8, he was a chorister at St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna, and sang there as a chorister till he was 17. Apparently he had trouble with the high notes when he was approaching 17. It's thought that he probably sang for Vivaldi's funeral, by the way. Because Vivaldi, I think we mentioned he died in Vienna. Anyway, besides being a chorister, he didn't get much musical theory in the cathedral there. So he was pretty much self-taught. He was a great reader, and so he learned all kinds of music theory and other ideas. Mainly by self-study. And by the time he was 21, he already they were producing an opera of his. By the time he was 25, he had become the music master for a local count, and spent much of his life in the Esterhazy famous family. That began when he was 29 years old. He was introduced to Mozart in 17, can't even read my own writing, 1784 I think it was. And they actually knew each other, played together sometimes, and as I said, he was a mentor to Mozart. He spent a little bit of time in London in the 1790s. It's interesting. Did I say? Yeah, 1790s, because much earlier in the decade, Handel moved to London, but was already deceased by this time. Now, Haydn is considered the father of modern symphony form. So that's not something that earlier composers in the century were writing. That's one reason they wrote a lot of instrumental stuff. But he very much did that. He wrote for the piano. Just wrote great number of concertos, masses, operas, you name it. So we're going to do an oboe concerto, which I should admit was attributed to him. I think some scholars are not 100% sure he was the composer of this. Just like certain artworks, you know, sometimes are attributed to a certain artist, but the art people aren't 100% sure. Okay, it's going to be in 3 movements. And as you know, that usually means fast, slow, fast. And that's true here. This first movement is supposed to be spirited or animated. Second movement, moderately slow. And the third movement, fairly brisk. Now the other thing I will say, you've been introduced to certain frills and embellishments that instrumentalists started using, like trills and grace notes and things like this. But with Haydn here, well, I'm now starting to see what are called cadenzas, where the composer actually writes notes for a soloist, maybe a virtuoso soloist in some cases. And there are no measure lines or anything like this, so the soloist is pretty free to interpret. If you've seen concertos performed by an orchestra like the CSO, often the conductor will stop conducting and simply just stands and waits, and then either at the end or near the end will start to pick up the beat again for the orchestra to come back in. Well, for me, this is a completely new experience, playing not only soloing as in this series, but now trying to figure out how to interpret the music in a cadenza. There's a cadenza in the middle of the selection I'm making from the first movement. There's another part that says ad lib, so that sounds like it gives you some freedom. And well, we'll see this along the way. The first movement of this concerto is actually 5 pages long. We're only going to do a section out of the first page, and then I'm going to skip this entire, well, half of the 5th page is all cadenza. And so I'll give you a taste of that cadenza. Finish the first movement. And that's as much as I want to say for now. Turn off that thing because I have no idea what the effect of playing the oboe would be. I'm going to wet down the reed a little. Make sure it's still wet enough. Okay. second. And the third. Thank you. That last movement is marked rondo, which means that you have an initial melody of some kind, and then as various other melodies come into it, that first one is brought back from time to time. That's actually been true of several of these movements of Haydn, where what was played initially you heard later on, even in the short segments that I played for you. Okay. The other composer, Domenico Cimarosa. Didn't take much to remind me that the mic helps. Okay. I actually had to look up Cimarosa's first name because it's not a household word, Domenico. Anyway, he was born in 1749. Both he and Haydn lived into the 19th century, unlike Mozart, who had a shorter life. Anyway, he was born near Naples, but died in Venice. Seems like a lot of composers have died in Venice. He was formally trained in music from age 7 to 21, so unlike Haydn, who was much self-taught, he had formal music school training all the way along. His work premiered in Naples when he was starting when he was 22 years old. He was already putting out operas, and his work was being played already in Rome and beyond in Italy by the time he was 25. Although he spent much of his life in Italy, from 1787 to 1791, he worked for the Empress Catherine II in St. Petersburg, Russia. It's true of many musicians who, at least at times in their careers, worked for some noble or royal patron. After that, he spent a couple of years in Vienna, then back to Naples, and where he spent most of the rest of his life. He was particularly known for his operas, but he did write a lot of instrumental and church music, including this concerto, which I have to say I heard several days ago on one of the music choice channels here at Hines Village. So it's not completely unknown. It is said that in his day, so in the latter part of the 18th century, he was actually more popular at that time than Mozart. but it tapered off in the 19th century, just like Vivaldi and Telemann, and as far as I know, has not had a huge revival in the 20th century, which both of those composers have had. As far as movements, this has got 4 movements. It's a little bit like the Handel concerto I did a couple months ago, which is going to be slow, fast, slow, fast, that kind of alternation. First movement, Larghetto, which is fairly slow, then Allegro, which you know is more brisk. Siciliana, which is similar to the third movement of Handel. That means some kind of dance song in 6/8 or 12/8 time. Slow, slow jig, but still has a dance feeling. And then Allegro Giusto, which means neither too fast nor too slow, I guess. Anyway, enough talk, we'll go to the play. Alan said I should just throw the music on the floor, but there's a table back here, so it seems a little more elegant. Still have to get used to taking a bow alone. Something new to learn at age 93. Okay, at this point, I'd like to throw it open for questions or comments. Mary?
During that cadence part, did you draw in notes for yourself to do, or was it?
No, I didn't. Actually, at the end of the first movement of the Cimarosa, I took the liberty, it starts on the low C, and I took the liberty of raising one note an octave, because it makes the fingering about 5 times easier. Because when you start on the low C, and then it goes to an E flat, because you're on the special fingering for the low C on the oboe, means you can't do the regular fingering for the A flat, so you have to, or for the E flat, so you have to do an alternate fingering. And then because you're doing that, the next note's an A flat, and you can't do the regular fingering for the A flat. Whereas if I start up an octave, everything's normal fingering, so that's much easier.
Lou, she wanted to know whether you wrote it.
Pardon?
She wanted to know whether you wrote that cadenza or did Haydn put it in?
Oh, Haydn. No, well, I was Cimarosa. No, the cadenza is written.
Oh, I see.
There was also, let's see. Well, I guess I got all the Cimarosa up here. Well, really, that's the only cadenza in the Cimarosa. But there were several in the Haydn, both in the first movement and in the third movement. You know, they're written, it's interesting, the notes are written smaller, which again, when you're 93 is not handy. And they're written without measures. So the whole second half of the 5th page of the first movement of the Haydn is in smaller notes and no measure bars whatsoever. And I picked a place in the middle to stop. But,
That's amazing. That is amazing. I never realized that would happen.
well, I mean, have you seen conductors where the soloist is playing cadenza and they simply even set their baton down sometimes and just stand there? Well, you probably have. Your son is a conductor, so who knows? Okay, any other questions or comments? Yes?
Will you remind us, when was the oboe created? When did it come?
The oboe was created more or less in its present form in the 17th century. So it had come into its present form at the beginning of the 18th century, just when those 5 composers I dealt with earlier were ready to compose.
Tell them about the dog collar. They'd like to hear that when they first played.
Yeah, the instruments, you know, they weren't as nice as this. They were hard to play in tune, and Larry tells me that oboists back then wore dog collars because they were afraid they'd rupture a blood vessel or something.
And that did happen.
Sounds like medieval torture. I mean, yeah, I mean, I never felt threatened by that, but I expect the reeds are better. A double reed wasn't just invented then. There was an instrument which was popular still in medieval times called a shawm, which had a double reed, but it had a mouthpiece. Looked like a thimble with the open part up. So the lips of the musician actually were on this thimble-looking thing. So only the tongue could actually touch double reed. So having your lips on a double reed, like in the present form of the oboe, I think gives the musician much more control. The shawm, though, I mean, it actually, I call it medieval, but it goes back to 2800 BC in the Middle East. So, I mean, that type of instrument was around for a long time. But it's only in the last, what, 3 centuries or more, 3.5 centuries, that we've actually had double reed instruments where the musician had the lips right on the reed. So, I should say a week ago, in the advertisements for this program, on the screen out here on the lobby, I was looking at it, I came down the stairs and I saw it, and I suddenly noticed that the instrument was not an oboe, it was a bassoon. So they're in the double reed family, but the, bassoon is a huge thing. It's basically for playing in the bass clef. And one significant way it differs from the oboe is it's a cylinder, like a clarinet or a flute. Whereas the oboe, as we learned last time, has a conical. Gets bigger as you come down from the top. Okay, other questions or comments? Well, if not, I want to give you a little taste of next time. And what I'm going to do is play some of the first oboe parts from at least one of Mozart duets. And now the old question is the reed dried out? You'll notice oboe players in orchestras, I mean, they have time when they're resting, but they don't end up giving talks in between. So they can keep a reed in their mouth or do whatever they need. Your granddaughter Julia, who I mentioned in earlier times, was my inspiration for resuming the oboe after a gap of 71 years. Played 4 times in the high school musical last week, and she was going back and forth between oboe and English horn. Well, that's got the same kind of problem because you don't use the same reed, and so you've got to worry about keeping both reeds in playable condition as you go along. Okay. So this is just a taste. Hearing the actual duet, I'm sure would be better. Sorry. Now in the actual duet, there are repeats and things built in there, but anyway, that gives you an idea of Mozart. And we'll do one more if you have the time. taste, come back on December the 27th. That's 2 days after Christmas. And hear lots of Mozart. I hope duets, and maybe even a little Christmas music. So.
Thank you.